welcome to our BELMAS Ignite session. We're really delighted that you're joining us either live tonight or on the recorded version that's on the website. We've had quite a few events, at least monthly, but with our special conference that we held back in July to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And this is just one of the events that we're holding to celebrate our theme this year of looking back and looking to the future. So I'm really delighted to be joined by 9 panelists tonight. You'll see there's only 9 of us on the screen at the moment, but we are being joined by Bethany Kelly towards the end of the session. She's coming to us straight from teaching, as we all have a want to do in the roles that we hold. So I'm going to, instead of introducing people one by one before we start, I'm going to move straight on to people's sessions. And then when we come to do the group panel at the end, if it's relevant and people want to say a bit more about their role or a bit about any of their particular context, that will be absolutely fine. So you can see that we have a range of different topics tonight, all that are connected to the things that have driven us to BELMAS, what we have got out of that membership in a really kind of diverse way. And we have various different takes on what's going on. So Megan's first 3 minutes, and she can kick us off. Thank you, Megan.
Okie doke. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to do the significance of the 50th anniversary. It doesn't seem like yesterday that I was the chair of BELMAS and we were doing the 40th anniversary. So in the spirit of Professor Chris James, who was a stalwart of BELMAS for a long time and is still about, I'm going to do 3 things about BELMAS that I think are useful to know and interesting to know. So the first thing I'd like to say something about is that BELMAS, people tend to forget, is a learned society. It's been going for 50 years from very small beginnings, where a group of people got together thinking it would be a good idea to talk about things to do with educational leadership and management. But back in those times, of course, 50 years ago, it was mainly about administration and management. And even today, our journal email is Educational Management, Administration and Leadership, and I'm the deputy editor of that. That's a quick plug there. So if you're really interested in the history of BELMAS, and even if you're not really interested, could I really hint that to take some time to go to the BELMAS website and About Us on the tag, you'll find a really useful history of BELMAS that was written by Helen Gunter, I think for the 40th anniversary, which will give you a real insight into how the society started and what it was set up to do. So that's the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about. The second thing I wanted to say was that how did I get involved with BELMAS? I started at the Open University as a researcher, and Ron Glatter, who some of you will know, former president of BELMAS, was unable to go to the BELMAS conference because he was poorly. So he asked me to present his paper. So I went along and I didn't tell anyone it wasn't Ron Glatter, and I got a huge audience, and therefore my first paper, I was able to talk through some of Ron's research, and it was a really good start to my time in BELMAS, and people were very welcoming. And I think that's still very true of any BELMAS event you might go to. The history of BELMAS is about people and making connections. So again, I would suggest that you go to the rigs, go to the conference, make history yourself for the 60th anniversary. The third thing I want to say in my time, and I have no idea where the time is at the moment, is about email, actually. We are producing a special 50th anniversary edition, which will be out next year. It's been specially commissioned from many people in the field who you'll know. But as part of that, I wanted to do something slightly different. So as well as the print copy, which will come out next year, we've just produced, it's hot off the press, a virtual edition, which is on, I'm going to put the link up for you in a minute, where I asked members of the editorial board to tell me their favourite paper from the past 50 years. There's a challenge. And all of them did a really good job. And there's some fascinating older articles there that you may not have seen, you may not have read. So I'm going to put that link in the chat and you can follow that through and enjoy the reading. So that's my mini potted history of BELMAS. And that's me.
Right on 3 minutes, exactly. So for those of you who've just joined us, or for those of you who haven't been to a BELMAS Ignite session before, the idea behind the Ignite is to talk just for 3 minutes, very quickly, in exactly the way that Megan has just exemplified for us there. So there are a range of different things mentioned there, and you can see that Megan's just posted in the chat the specific special issue from email that resonates with the 50th anniversary that we've had this year. So please do go to the website and have a look at the 40th anniversary write-up Helen Gunter did that Megan was just talking about, and that special edition there as well. Fabulous. Thank you, Megan. There's lots there that I'm sure we'll come back to shortly, but we're going to keep that fast-paced momentum going and move straight on to Suzanne. Over you go.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'm Suzanne Coleshaw. My Twitter handle is there. My husband says that I tend to be more married to Twitter than I am to him, so make of that what you will. So I've called this presentation BELMAS and Me. And I've hinted at the bottom at how long I've been in a relationship with BELMAS, because there is no hint of a 7-year itch. We got through the 7 years last year. So I joined in about 2013, 2014. I wanted to talk to you about 4 kind of seminal moments in my relationship with BELMAS. And I'm going to start with 2015. So in 2015, I was quite an active BELMAS member and was engaging in the BELMAS chats. And that's a quick shout out really for anybody who feels that they want to host a BELMAS chat, get in touch with the office and suggest a topic. So I then went off to my PhD interview at the University of Hertfordshire and quite happily was saying, oh yes, I've recently hosted a BELMAS chat, not realizing that one of the 2 people on the interview panel was no other than Professor Philip Woods, who was at that stage chair of BELMAS. Moving on to 2018, a few years later, this is a slide here from a presentation that I did at the University in Innsbruck, and I did the presentation in German, big moment for me. But why I'm showing you that is because the connection to the University of Innsbruck came through a conversation at a BELMAS conference in the summer of 2018. And so by being at the conference and presenting my work at the conference, I was able to make connections with somebody who then invited me, and we continue to work together with the University of Innsbruck. Fast forwarding then to 2019, I was invited to be the new editor for the BELMAS blog, and that is a shout out to the BELMAS blog. There are guidelines on the BELMAS website if you'd like to find out more about submitting a blog. And very, very pleased to share that particular screenshot, which is of our first bilingual blog, which was in Welsh and English. Very exciting, especially as a linguist. I was very excited to be able to publish that. So if you're interested, get in touch with blog ideas. And then most recently, this is a slide from this year's BELMAS conference, which was presenting some of the ongoing research that I'm doing thanks to a BELMAS grant that I was lucky enough to apply for and be successful in securing. So that's my relationship with BELMAS, 7 years and counting. I think I've got a few seconds left, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
That's absolutely fine, Suzanne, thank you. And lots touched on there in terms of presenting at international conferences and presenting in other languages, and the international dimension of BELMAS mentioned, which May is going to come on to talk about again later on. So thanks very much for that. So it is this kind of fast-paced momentum that we're talking about that Suzanne's just kept going there. And with that in mind, we're going to have Caroline next talking about her experience with BELMAS.
So my name's Caroline Vinall. I work for church schools in the Diocese of Ely, and I have been a member of BELMAS since I started as part of my Masters as a student member. When I became a student member, it was about, for me, about finding out more about the leadership and management of schools, connecting with people and trying to understand some of the hot topics that were going on at the time. So that was my student membership, and sometimes student membership you can feel a bit sort of imposter syndrome-ish, and I did, but I decided to have a bit more proactive engagement with some of the research interest groups. So I went along to Birmingham and I attended a research interest group about structural reform, which was something that I was researching. And it was fascinating. I met some fantastic people there who as well have sort of also followed me on my journey, or I followed them on my journey in research. I finished my master's in 2019, and then because I did well in my master's, I kind of had a little bit of confidence to attend the conference. Now, I had, through Suzanne's research and through mutual friends and work, had met Suzanne, and she encouraged me to go to the BELMAS conference, encouraged me to present at a similar Ignite session some of my research, and encouraged me then to go to the conference and to present and to meet more people who were from BELMAS. And I can absolutely wholeheartedly agree with Megan when she says that the people in BELMAS are incredibly friendly, incredibly interested in all types of research. Everybody's very interested in what's going on at the time. I then met Stephen, who's on the panel, and as a result of that, he gave me a little bit of confidence to become a peer reviewer for Management in Education, the other publication that is published by BELMAS. And as a result of that, I really got an insight into peer reviewing, about how to write a formal article yourself, not just a huge thesis, and therefore was also encouraged to write an article myself on one of the topics that I had researched. So as a result of those connections, I then was able to write up some of my research, and hopefully that'll be out later this year. As a result of, again, conversations and connections at the BELMAS conference and at the through Suzanne, I also am now helping out people at the University of Innsbruck with proofreading, because they're writing in English and I speak fluent German as well. So it helps them to be able to make sure that their English is of the right standard and quality for publications. So I've written my article. I've also written a BELMAS blog about the challenges that have been faced during COVID. And I've also, as a result of contacts made, been able to invite people from BELMAS to come and speak at my conferences that I organise. And so this whole connection seems as though it might be a bit cliquey. And there can be times in education when there are sort of groups of people who huddle together and are not very welcoming. And I found that all of the BELMAS community have always been very welcoming. I don't have a PhD, I have a master's, but I don't have a PhD. But still, even though I've done my research, I've been welcomed at everything that I've been to. When I've spoken about my research, people have been interested and have really supported me and built my confidence as my master's research being valid research that people would be interested in. And so I think that would be what I would say about BELMAS, is that from a research point of view and an encouragement as an academic community, BELMAS has been really crucial in supporting me in my academic learning journey. And my membership has given me a real academic slant to all of the work that I do, because I'm always looking out for things that in research and using my BELMAS membership to make sure that I'm abreast of the most up-to-date research that's going on. And so I think probably that's my 3 minutes, Deb.
Brilliant. That's great, Caroline. There are lots of different angles that we can come back to in our group discussion at the end there. I thought that gave a really good run through of what you've managed to get out of it. And again, some more international connections and European connections that we can talk about later on. Fabulous. Okay, Rob, over to you, because we're going to keep this fast-paced 3 minutes up.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, so similar to Suzanne, I started my MEd at the same time as her. So I suspect I joined BELMAS on or around the same sort of time in 2012-13. And at that point, I suppose I felt a little bit intimidated as a school leader, and I was a head at the time, in sort of engaging in discourse and discussion and debate with academics who seemed to sort of exist in a very different landscape to my own. But what I found through membership of BELMAS and attending my first conference the following year, and then submitting a paper and presenting a paper the year after that, that in fact BELMAS offered links between school leadership and academic research, and beginning to make sense in that way around what is working and what might not be working. And I think BELMAS has developed a very strong symbiotic relationship between academics and between school leaders in particular, because it's an organisation focused particularly on leadership management. And I think BELMAS has engaged and done very well, and many of us are representatives of what you might call pracademics, whether that's through rigs, whether that's through other events, whether that's through conferences, whether it's through a publication like Management in Education, which Caroline's already mentioned, which are less formally academic journals, but nevertheless still able to offer important insights into the world of school leadership from both a practitioner and an academic perspective. And Thingling is my little idea around mingling of thought. I do believe that it's important that it is genuinely international. There can be a dimension, because it's called the British, that it is it sounds very much centered on these isles. And I think it's important to think of the current landscape from a sort of, and I put here, avian perspective. When we are in schools or our universities, we are very much focused on the walls and the immediate environ. But BELMAS, because it is international, is able to sit above all of that and connect peoples and systems. I do think it's important that it represents a safe space. We do seem to live in an increasingly panoptical, if that's such a word, landscape, which can feel quite intimidating as an academic or a practitioner. And I've found that it's been very important for stepping outside of institutional loyalties to explore with critical detachment and a degree of irony, a sense of humour, and a sort of a joviality that can explore some of the very pressing and serious issues. And I think as we look to another 50 years of BELMAS, that the world is readjusting to paradigms post-COVID. And I think, therefore, that BELMAS will offer us an opportunity to explore what is changing and has changed as a result.
That's great, Rob. Thanks. All sorts of connections and things that we can return to later on in our discussion there. So that's actually really great. So we're going to keep this kind of fast-paced movement going, and off you go, Claire.
So I think it's so wonderful that actually quite a lot of the things that I'm going to say are things that are mirrored in other speakers who've gone before me. So I also joined BELMAS as an MA student while studying at the University of Nottingham. And I think that for me, it can be summarised in these three key points. So firstly, I'm an assistant principal and I'm studying for my doctorate part-time. I'm also a new mum. And so being able to balance all of that is made so much easier by being a member of BELMAS. The resources are of really, really high quality, but they're also something that is manageable for me to be able to read and access and also be a part of, which is really exciting. So having that regular access to current educational research in a way that I can kind of cope with whilst I'm working really can't quite be underestimated. So I'm one of the conveners for the Reflective Practice Research Interest Group, and I think that in a world where we limit ourselves to 180 characters, to be able to have that time to stop, pause and reflect with a group of practitioners and researchers who are just really interested in getting together for the common good of children in schools is something that is just so powerful. And that time to stop and think has been something that has had a huge impact on me. Also, we're going to be doing a special edition of Management in Education, looking at reflective practice, and I think that sometimes we get that conversation about bridging the gap between practice and research, and I feel as though with BELMAS I've never really felt a gap. I've felt genuine interest from academics that I've met and real opportunities for practitioners that are involved in the organisation. And so the Reflective Practice Rig is another example of that, working together to create hopefully a special edition at some point in the near future, which is going to be a mixture of educational research, think pieces and interviews. And also it gives me the opportunity to write. So as a doctoral candidate, I want to try and write and hone my skills as quickly as possible, and BELMAS allows me to do that. I think for me, the final point is the most important one. So as a new mum, an assistant principal and a doctoral candidate, it can feel quite intimidating, but actually seeing people who've gone before and done it and said, yeah, it is really tough, but you can do it, and this is how I did it. There are people who've done that for me in this talk, and I actually can't underestimate how important that's been for me. And it's just people who've been there before and have succeeded, and seeing what that looks like in real terms is something that I think is incredibly valuable. Like I say, I just think that this whole research and practice gap just doesn't exist at BELMAS. I've never met an academic that thought I wasn't good enough to talk to because I was just a teacher or anything like that. That genuine inquiry and collaboration is something that runs through the veins of the organisation. And that's me.
Really fantastic. Thanks very much, Claire. That's absolutely great. And it's true, isn't it? You know, those of us who've watched other people do it, we get support from it, and that encourages the next generation of people to come through and do it. And I think that is, you know, really not to be underestimated in terms of that wider kind of support group in any way, shape or form. It gets easier as you go through. It really does. So that was brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to try and keep that fast pace moving, and then we'll return to our discussion at the end. So Mermin, if I can bring you in now, that would be fabulous.
Right, thank you. So it's hello, marhaban, ciao, bonjour, ni hao, and hello. Welcome to BELMAS. What I'm saying is that I started just like my other colleagues. I started as a member in 2011 when I was doing my master's degree. And I thought, okay, BELMAS, this is not for me. I am just a teacher. I've got nothing to do with leadership. I've got nothing to do with senior leaders or anything like that. But my friend was doing his master's degree at Manchester University where we were doing it. And he said to me, go on, go and listen to them. Okay, listen to these teachers. So I went in 2011 and I sat there listening to those beautiful teachers talking about their leadership and what they were doing and what they were going through, their frustration, their intimidating, their academic research. And I thought, oh, I belong to these people. Although because my background is TESOL and education technology, there were big institutions out there that I can belong to, but I never felt that family, only when I came to BELMAS. When I started talking about what I was looking at, and I was not doing anything to do with leadership, but what we were going through in the Middle East, and especially in Iraq, where I come from, we had problems with war. We had problems with bringing back children to schools. So I started talking to friends of mine who were in BELMAS, and they said to me, do you know that? This is what leadership is all about. You teachers became leaders. And that's when I started to think about looking at what does leadership mean? What does it mean? Talking to other teachers when I come to these conferences, talking to them, what do they do? How can they help me? By talking to people who are working with mental health issues, people who are in education leadership, looking at senior leaders and so on. I got so much out of these people. And when I started to talk about my problems facing in Iraq, these people inspired me to write a paper, which is not to do with my master's degree or my PhD when I was doing my PhD. They opened my eyes and said to me, why don't you write what your country is going through, your leadership, your schools, what they're going to, what their teachers are inspired to do and bring back the students at home. And then I started to write a paper where I became a peer reviewing with Stephen, where he pushed me to do this, and I started to get some ideas from BELMAS. And then I started to write a paper about my situation in Iraq and how we became leaders. I tell all my colleagues who are international, who work outside the UK, come and join them. Come and join BELMAS, because you're going to get so much, and it's the same. We are the same. We're having the same problems in our countries and in the UK. And here it's a place where you feel, like all my colleagues said, it's a place where you feel you're safe, somewhere where you can talk about your problems, and here where you can exchange ideas. Thank you very much.
And absolutely spot on 3 minutes. That was really fantastic timing, May. Thank you very much. Really, really great. So we've talked through a lot of different topics already this evening, and now we're moving on to thinking about the way in which BELMAS can help with dissemination of research. So we're joined by 2 speakers this time rather than 1. I think perhaps one will play a more starring role than the other. Let's see how this goes and how you divide your time up from the Scottish Leadership Headship Group. And Alison, are you starting?
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting our contribution. So I'm part of the Future of Headship Research Group at the University of Glasgow School of Education. My post is a head teacher in a large secondary school in Glasgow, and I'm currently seconded 2 days a week as head teacher in residence at the School of Education. So I teach on the headship preparation programmes, and I'm also a PhD student looking at educational leadership, and I'm part of this Future of Headship team, and I'm speaking on behalf of them today. So I'm joined by Professor Marjorie McMahon, who's Head of School of Education, and I've pictured the rest of our colleagues on this slide, Christine Ford and Dee Torrance, who lead the project, and Julie Harvey. And these faces are no strangers to BELMAS, and it was Dee and Christine that introduced me to BELMAS just this year. For us, it's a privilege to contribute to and learn from the collective voice of the BELMAS community. Our work continues to evolve, and it's been informed over many years by various interactions with BELMAS, including its collaborative national and international research networks, the conferences, and the journal publications. So Future of Headship is a multi-method project exploring different aspects of headship through 6 interrelated strands. The first looks at the evolving role of the head teacher in Scotland, and we're exploring there the tensions around what is asked of head teachers, how the role is perceived, and the implications for headship preparation and continued professional learning. Second strand explores the lived experiences of head teachers in Scotland. The third investigates the experiences and impact of the Into Headship programme. And there are 2 parts to strand 4, exploring social justice leadership in different education systems, and also looking at the understanding and enactment of social justice leadership in the role of middle leaders in a case study school in Scotland. Strand 5 focuses on middle leadership as an area of growing interest, with a tri-nation project involving Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And the final strand aims to explore practice and advanced knowledge in leadership learning in initial teacher education. So we are hoping and planning that our research contributes to knowledge around head teacher preparation and enactment, and our relationship with BELMAS will support this. Currently, Scotland's education system is complex and volatile. It's characterised by policy unrest. There's been the instigation recently of a significant reform process, and of course, we're living with the impact of the pandemic. And all of this creates tensions and challenges in constructions of educational leadership. So the figure to the right of this slide is just some of our emergent thinking through exploration of what is asked of head teachers and what the implications are for head teacher preparation in a system in Scotland that demands equity and excellence through empowerment of head teachers in policy and rhetoric, but not always in practice. It's important for us that we elicit new insights into the role through co-production of knowledge that privileges the lived experiences of head teachers. Scotland is our case study, but also through BELMAS, we're extending the conversation, the learning, the criticality, and the voices of school leaders beyond Scotland and beyond the UK. So we look forward to more opportunities to disseminate our research through this network and to learn and benefit and grow from the criticality, the feedback, the support, and the challenge from the colleagues that are part of the BELMAS community.
That's fantastic, Alison. Thank you very much. That's really great. And lots of themes that we can come back and pick up on in our discussion in a little while, particularly in terms of my interest of leadership preparation and development. So there's lots of overlap there. So that was great. Right. So lots of people have mentioned publications. So we're going to move swiftly on to Stephen Rayner, who's Deputy Editor of MIE, for our next slot. Thanks, Stephen.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, Deb. It's good to speak to you. I attended my first BELMAS conference in 2012 as well, and it's taken me 9 years to realise, thanks to colleagues here, that I wasn't the only person feeling rather scared and intimidated by all these clever people with their knowledge and their publications. I'm now Deputy Editor of Management in Education, and I've been given the brief really of picking up on some of the points that Alison has just made about research dissemination and specifically about opportunities for publication through the BELMAS journals. I'm going to speak mainly about management in education because that's the publication that I'm involved in, but with a brief reference to email towards the end. I mainly wanted to speak about the first 4 lines of what's on the slide, really, and I wanted to pick up 4 words in that in that section, practitioners, contemporary, new and international. That first couple of sentences there is taken from the Management in Education website, where we set out the purpose of the journal Management in Education. And this is very much practice focused. So that phrase about aspects to which practitioners can relate is a significant element of the distinctive contribution that we hope that Management in Education will make. That practitioners can relate to as authors, but also as contributors. And I think that's really important. And I'll come later to some of the details of what those contributions might be. Contemporary, yes. And of course, practitioners are right at the centre of what is happening now. And so practitioner research is so valuable for that. And Claire has mentioned some aspects of that earlier. Contributions from new authors, yes, I hadn't written anything in 2012, and my first opportunity for publication was through Management in Education. Really good individual support from Linda Hammersley-Fletcher, who was then the editor, and really sympathetic treatment and understanding as an inexperienced first-time author. And finally, increasingly in the last few years, international authors. And Paul, the editor-in-chief, and I were looking through recent contributions, and of the articles submitted recently, around 2/3 are from international authors, either based on research conducted internationally, maybe from authors writing not in their first language, and we've published some tremendous articles from those sources. It's a diverse journal in terms of content, so we have all of those we have that range of things. We have peer-reviewed articles, but we also have other sections as well, as I've mentioned there. I've included some of the guidance about manuscripts to give an idea of what makes this journal distinctive. So if I could mention, for example, that in email, education management, administration and leadership, the guidance is for articles of no more than 8,000 words, including references. So you can see that actually there are opportunities for articles to be better suited to one journal or another. Finally, a request not just to write for us, but also to review for us, and thanks to some of those present who already do this, whether as peer reviewers of articles or as book reviewers. And do get in touch with Paul, editor-in-chief, or myself if you can contribute in any way, either by writing your first article or a later article, or by being a reviewer. Thank you.
And fabulous timing there, Stephen. I could hear your alarm going off in the background as well, so that's really great. Bethany, I have to say that all of us on the call have huge respect for the fact that you have literally hopped in from teaching straight into another delivery mode. So we're just going to seamlessly carry on and hand over for your 3 minutes, and then you can take a deep breath and breathe while we then discuss things before you come into the discussion afterwards. Well done. Okay. Over to you.
I know I've literally come out, not just one, can I tell you, but 2 sessions. One on I'm kind of just making sure I can see the thing going. One on, I've just done literature review, and before that talking about critical reflection. So maybe I'm in the right way of thinking. So some of you will have sort of heard me talk a little bit in terms of my experiences at BELMAS. I share this quite often with my students. I started 15 years ago, I think it was, in terms of looking at sort of what BELMAS was all about, what it kind of meant to me, what was my place in it. And when I first started, I was a deputy head, and I was mightily intimidated by the kind of great and wonderful people that I was surrounded with, and was very frightened, for example, about getting too involved in BELMAS, because I thought that I was well out of my depth, and certainly I was definitely outside of my comfort zone. And the wonderful and lovely Megan persuaded me to attend a conference, and believe it or not, I even eventually presented a poster as part of my doctoral research at a conference, and that was terrifying because I genuinely thought that people were going to come along and laugh at my poster and think in terms of how ridiculous it was, what was she trying to prove, all of these kinds of things. And in fact, people were just wonderful and lovely and just so encouraging and supportive. But it's quite interesting because I know already I still sort of find myself in a little bit of what I call their no woman's land, you know, because and I kind of reached out to a lot of the equivalents of me in different universities. And that is somebody who has spent decades working as a teacher in schools, who then has come into the university experience and has been then somebody who delivers, for example, training teachers. And I've, as I say, just come off from 2 Zoom calls teaching master students. And the problem is that, and it was very interesting, when I asked colleagues about this in different schools, and it linked to my own research, which was very much focused on the idea of identity. I kind of said the big problem is that we're kind of like in the middle of this kind of landscape. And of course, as many of you know, even since I delivered the talk at BELMAS, it's got even more controversial. How are we perceived? Are we perceived as academics? Well, not necessarily by other departments and faculties. Are we perceived as teachers? Not by teachers necessarily. They see us as academics. And so we're somewhere in the middle. And sometimes that can still be the case at BELMAS. Sometimes our colleagues can see us as being not quite there in terms of being full academics because we're practitioners. And then sometimes practitioners think we've veered over into the academics. So that was my cry. I love BELMAS. It's been the biggest influence in terms of my own development. But are we sometimes still in the middle? Are we academics? Are we practitioners? And do we need to pick a side? 3 minutes?
Actually, only 2.5.
Oh, really?
You can stop there if you want to.
Well, mine says 3:20, so you must have given me good grace. I did kind of rush in terms at the end.
I'm still on 2:52 over here, but that's fine. So I think that's a really good point, though, for us to start our discussion. So if we perhaps want to put our last slide up and just have a quick look at the last slide.
There's various actions on mine, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So people can see that discussion that you were just
I think the thing I would just add with my extra 20 seconds is just, I think, and many of you will see this from Twitter, that this war has got more and more kind of vitriolic as it's gone on, particularly in light of the ITT review, etc. That I'm shocked at how many of my former colleagues as teachers just reject totally the idea of coming in and making it's almost as if you're selling out by moving into academia. And as I said, some of my academic colleagues think you're the funny little educationalists that aren't quite the same in the same league as everybody else. I get a lot of kind of patting on the head about my lack of understanding about applying for grants and so on, moving into this process. So I think it is, I feel a little bit of where's my identity caught in the middle of it.
Yeah, and that whole line you've got underneath there about the gap is getting bigger. So if you don't get an opportunity to apply for those research grants, other people who've got them perhaps run away. And then there isn't the opportunity in some senses to kind of move on in that sense. So if we move on to our final slide, they're your questions there in that bottom right hand corner, but
hopefully might trigger some discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So around research and practice. So what we'd like you to do now is post your questions in the chat function. And May's already put up a comment there. And we just thought we'd put just a list here of the ways in which we'd like you to get more involved. So these are all things that all the speakers tonight have mentioned. So blogs, Twitter chat, the research interest groups, both MIE and email, and participation in the conference. So at that point, we're going to finish the slides so that we can all be seen on the screen. And then what we'd really like to do is kind of continue that discussion really about what we've got out of that membership. So that's great. I can see everybody's turning their cameras back on. Fantastic. So May, do you want to kick us off there?
Yes, just listening to all my colleagues, and this is how I felt since 2011. I was going through a lot as a master's degree, then a PhD, then I went into teacher training. I worked in the UK, I worked in the Middle East, and I needed a space to talk about what I was going through. And I couldn't find that place, that safe place. So when I started to belong to BELMAS and talking what I was going through, and then I would listen to people say, oh, I know, you could do this. Oh, I could do this. Or sometimes I contribute. Oh, I've gone through this and we did this and X and Y. And this place where your voice is being heard, it's very rare when teachers' voices are heard. I felt that in BELMAS. And from there, I was encouraged to write about what I was doing, what I was going through, and which I have done, and which I'm doing now as well. And being an working internationally, I worked in Dubai, Jordan, in the Middle East, coming back home to BELMAS and talking what I was going through. Again, I could see that there isn't a difference between teachers suffering in the Middle East or suffering in the UK. So again, talking to people who are going through the same thing, in the same boat, it's beautiful, and you feel that you're all one. And that's what this is what I wanted to hear from others.
That's great, May. That's a really lovely contribution. And it goes back to Rob's comment that he was making about that sort of avian perspective on things earlier on. So I think that's something we'd like to draw out. I wondered if Marjorie wanted to have the opportunity to come in there, because we heard from Alison early on, but we didn't get the opportunity to hear from you as well. Those 3-minute time slots are quite tight, aren't they? But for those of you who are watching this as a recording, if you're not familiar with the way in which the Scottish system works, head teachers like Alison are given an opportunity to be head teachers in residence and tied to a university academic department. And Alison, it just sounds like the most fabulous opportunity for you. You're being able to do your PhD research, you're tied into this great group of colleagues there. So Marjorie, do you want to just have a minute to explain how that works for us?
Thanks, Deb. It's an innovation that we've introduced at University of Glasgow when we were introducing our new headship programme, the into headship programme. And I just wanted to respond to Bethany's comments about that theory-practice divide, and that, we struggle with that as well. And, I do sometimes think, is it a false dichotomy? We've tried to work very, very hard to overcome that. And we put a lot of emphasis on partnership, working in partnership in the Scottish context. And that's working closely with our head teachers. They were part of the original design group for Into Headship. And I do think actually this model works really well because it's very authentic. So Alison now is seconded to work with us 2 days a week, and you have 3 days in your own school. She can say more about this herself, but I think one of the rich things of BELMAS for me is being a place then that we can come and explore different ways of innovating, different challenges across the system, and use that to help us then develop the models that we're trying to advance in our Scottish context. Thanks, Deb.
Welcome. Alison, do you want to just chip in a bit there about what the amount that you've had out of it and the impact of your own research?
It's been enormous. I just completed my master's at the University of Glasgow kind of the year before I was seconded to this head teacher in residence role. So I already had a relationship with the University of Glasgow. But in terms of being part of this research group, still being a practicing head teacher and being able to contribute to the learning of future and new head teachers, it's an absolute privilege. And I think it really does kind of cut the divide between the practice and the research. And it gives that kind of authenticity, I think, to the actual programme, the content of the programme, when you have a practising head teacher who is leading other future or aspiring head teachers. I don't think it happens in other universities in Scotland, but this was something that was initiated by Glasgow University, and the person that worked with Margie initiating that had done quite significant amount of research for her Ed.D. on early headship experiences and preparation of headship. So this is leading on from that, and our future of headship research hopes to contribute further to that. And my own research is looking at the future of headship in Scotland as well as a new model imperative, given the significant changes to the role over the last number of years since I've been in headship.
That's great, Alison, thank you. It's really interesting. So Julie, who's part of your team, has obviously posted up this comment here that we can all see in the chat. But Claire, do you want to just have an opportunity to speak about, really you've managed to kind of create that space for yourself, because it doesn't exist more formally in any of the universities that I know of in England. And I think it's interesting sort of space that you're trying to generate or successfully generating it there because you want to and because you're passionate about it, as opposed to because another group of people are passionate about it and are facilitating it with Alison.
I think it's just that I think what you're describing just sounds like such a wonderful opportunity to take a step back and really think about the bigger picture rather than just the day-to-day stuff. And I think that's what some days keeps me sane. People think that I'm crazy doing a doctorate whilst I'm working full-time, but actually, I apologise, you can hear my baby in the background. My husband's putting him to sleep next door. But actually, I am my calmest and I'm my most focused and my most capable when I have that time at university to go away and really think about what it is that I'm doing and getting back to those like core values and purpose and asking those questions in a space that it's okay to get it wrong, because in school sometimes we don't want to appear as though we don't know the answer because there's that level of accountability and everything else going on. But actually being able to step back and say, well, what is the answer to that question? What do we think about it and how can we discuss it is more powerful than I can really explain. It keeps me going.
I'm very impressed at your whole level of tuning out ability there, Claire, to stay focused on what you're talking about. But what you're touching on is that pracademic that you were talking about, Rob, that you were talking about, Beth. Do you want to come in there, Beth?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the days when I was still considering the thought of being a head teacher, which I abandoned, I have to say, just for me, a bit after that, I can remember, for example, applying for a headship, and a pretty well-known leadership advisor in schools, I won't go any further than that, sort of was like trying to sort of look at, the process and looked at an application, or was giving me feedback. Actually, they'd been involved in a interview that I'd done, and they said to me, do you know what, I would take out of your letter that you want to do a doctorate. I don't think that's very good. It would be far better. It's a shame you haven't really got any children that you could talk about, because that would come across much better in your letter than trying to talk about further study that you want to do. And I know I'm old, but it wasn't that long ago. And, you just kind of think, oh, my Lord, which of course is what ultimately led to the research that I did on headship recruitment. But I think that it is shocking sometimes how fixed still some ideas are about what people's roles are. And I think, to be honest, the sort of battle on Twitter shows that, that people, I saw somebody, for example, last night on Twitter say, has anybody actually ever come up with anything good from a doctorate that has actually made a difference in education? And you just got to think, really, seriously, is that kind of, what is that all you've got to say tonight on Twitter? Is that? So maybe I'm just a bit cynical.
Megan, it's that thinking space that you've just posted the comment up in here. And Rob, I know when you were ahead, it was thinking space that you really appreciated, probably on Megan's master's programme. But I wondered if the two of you wanted to have an opportunity to talk about that.
Didn't I persuade you to go away for a weekend at the college? So you were just thinking. I seem to remember that. Yeah, yeah, was that right? Am I not
Yes, no, that's correct. And I took you up on that, and Corpus Christi was lovely at the time.
Yes, that's right.
Perfect.
I think we try to do too many things without thinking, because both teaching and academia are all about thinking things through, and making sure we have time to do that should be built into our DNA. It should be built into what we do. And I'd certainly tell it, as Rob said, I say it to, excuse me, I say it to students that I work with on masters and doctorates, but do I do it for myself? I was talking to academics today, in fact, and they were saying, oh dear, I just haven't got time to do any thinking about this, reading about this. And I was thinking, it's like, you know, growing a little plant and deciding not to water it or give it any compost and just hoping that it's going to go somewhere. You need to nurture all these things, and thinking time is not wasted time.
And actually, I'd go further, Meg, and I would say it's critical to survival and thrival, if that's such a word. And I've just finished reading a book on neuroscience and about the the amygdala and the mammalian brain and how that creates lots of emotional responses because of the pressures of working in schools and universities to some extent. You get wrapped up in day-to-day decision making at the expense of the ability to be rational and to take the longer term view and be more reflective. And I found I had that space, and it was almost I lost that space when I finished my masters. And I know you were encouraging me to do a PhD or an EdD, and in some respects I should have. And the consequence of it was that I think the inability as a head to find that space led to a heart attack, in my case at 53, from someone who is relatively fit. And I think the burnout that school leaders are currently experiencing now, and I think I got out when I was fortunate to get out, because it's got a lot worse in the last year. And I would encourage our heads, not discourage our heads and leaders, and also for university. And it's interesting seeing now work as a lecturer in a university, and seeing some of the university staff engage in the same sort of high pressure decision making. And I almost want to say to them, find your space. You need that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. That's really true.
And Caroline, you work with those senior leaders on a daily basis who are struggling to find that thinking space and take that avian perspective.
Yeah, I'm in a really privileged position in the fact that I work with church schools across the diocese. So we have 85 church schools, and we go into our schools, but we're not holding them to account. And we get very worried when some of our head teachers don't actually respond, or they're not in contact with us, because we then realise that they're so ingrained in their day-to-day that they haven't actually managed to look up at all. And it's that looking upwards that's really important. So I am very privileged to be able to give head teachers that time, even if it's just an hour, to go through things like strategy, to think about things, to bounce ideas off, but in a non-confrontational and non-aggressive way. It seems that accountability is all around us and is a constant threat, which is holding people down and pushing them down, whereas what we try to do is give people the space to think and reflect and to work out what's best for not only them but also the children in their school. And so it is a real position of privilege that I have to guide and work with head teachers and governors as well in their work, to give them that time and space to be able to think strategically rather than be caught up in the operational.
And some of those themes were embedded in your research, Suzanne, on struggling and the roles of struggling teachers who were finding it difficult to find that space.
Absolutely. And I did predominantly interview and spend time speaking with and working with teachers, but there were leaders and there were middle leaders who were very willing to share their experience of struggling. And I think there are common threads. I think the way that accountability is experienced, isn't entirely positive. I say that struggling is a fractured state. And I think Caroline used a very interesting phrase just now about some of the head teachers that she's working with. It's about that looking down and not having time to look up and out into the wider field, be that having the time to read things or kind of discuss and engage beyond your kind of immediate concern. So yes, there's lots of resonance, I think, there. And this sounds like a real shameful plug, but it is. But actually, that's why a blog, for example, is an excellent outlet. 800 words kind of is almost like a brain dumping kind of exercise that you can get your thoughts down into a format that doesn't have to be peer reviewed as such. I do read them, but it can be that you can get an idea down. It can be a think piece, it could be a reflective piece, or something that you've read or something that you're tussling with. And I think kind of providing those kind of opportunities to reflect and to be seen in the way that you reflect, I think is really important. So that is shameless, but I'm saying I think a blog is a really good place for that kind of to hold that space to think.
That's lovely. And if people want to take that one step further, Stephen, they can come onto you with those reflective pieces and opinion pieces, perhaps widening out something that started as a blog and developing their ideas for that.
That's right. And actually, Suzanne mentions a shameless plug. You gave me 3 minutes to do a shameless plug for MIE, and the reflective piece is there. I mean, we need to hear more from the Scottish Heads Research Group, for example, in a reflective piece. That would be great. And yes, it isn't all about writing long articles, is it? And the reflective pieces in MIE also go through a peer review process and an editorial process. So there are opportunities for research dissemination all over the place.
And I think I'd probably get a brickbat from Tony Bush if I didn't say that until I really became involved with email, I didn't realize how much work people had to do on their articles before we published them. I had this feeling people wrote them in and it was all fine, but actually we do try to help people. But it may be, somebody once told me, well, Martin Hammersley once told me actually, that writing is thinking. And I actually think you can easily write 8,000 words about something, and you will feel better at the end of it. It may not be ready for MIE or for email, but it's a start on the road to that. And sometimes it may just come to you as well.
There's a really insightful comment here in the chat as well from Fiona Creeby, our BELMAS treasurer, talking about the range of people that they have on their programmes, and across all sectors, not just the education sector, but this fast-paced, this challenging, this constantly changing environment, which was true before COVID, and now we're post-COVID or still perhaps mid-COVID or wherever we are in that curve. But that whole concept of emotional labour and the amount that we carry, and actually we need that different range of context to be able to dissipate some of that emotion in. And I think a blog, Suzanne, that you can build on into a paper, Stephen, that, if you've got some research that's really high quality, Megan, that you can tap into with it, then it becomes appropriate for email. But I definitely see, Marjorie, a special edition from the Future of Headship group shaping up as part of this process. I think that's definitely there. And I think these sorts of conversations, Claire, Beth, they perhaps help to break down some of those academic contexts that we're in. So Beth, when you're with your students, and Claire, when you're literally in the staff room. I got into BELMAS in the first place because my principal left his copy of MIE in the staff room. That was the first, how I came across it. And if we don't have that sort of engagement with BELMAS to develop that connection with all of us in the way that we come on through, then people don't find it and they miss us and that connection. And I think as our hour today, and I'm going to stop now because we've got over our hour today shows, that we make lots of connections that are really powerful and really useful through that process. So thanks very much, everybody. Beth's just putting that she's a BELMAS pusher in the chat there. So if you want to push people to the website, to the recording of this session, and ways in which people can get involved in our 50th anniversary year, that would be great. Thanks very much.